Hello friends, welcome to Annie Update. How are you all? I hope you're all doing well wherever you are. In this video, I will discuss Mob Psycho 100 Part 3. But before that, I recommend you watch the previous parts first. The video link is in the description below. Alright, without further ado, let's get into the story. In the previous episode, we saw an intense battle between Mob and Taruki. That fight ended with Taruki's defeat. However, the battle resulted in massive destruction and severe damage at Black Vinegar Middle School. Meanwhile, people believed the destruction was caused by a mysterious phenomenon. Ritsu, who witnessed it, couldn't believe that his older brother was responsible. While he was sleeping, Ritsu suddenly woke up from a dream, where he saw his brother demonstrate the full extent of his powers. After that, Ritsu tried to unleash his supernatural abilities like his brother, but once again, he failed. Meanwhile, on the other side, Mob and Reigen received a client named Hitoshi. Hitoshi wanted to contact his deceased father. Using his usual tricks, Reigen pretended to be Hitoshi's father, and surprisingly, Hitoshi believed him. Fueled by his emotions, Hitoshi asked for the safe's password that his father had left behind. Of course, Reigen had no idea about it. Left with no choice, Reigen used his signature punch technique to make Hitoshi faint. However, Reigen claimed it was just self-defense. Hearing that, Mob started thinking about what he did to Taruki and their school, whether that too could be considered self-defense. However, all of it happened when Mob was unconscious. Mob then said he no longer wanted to use his powers. Upon hearing this, Reigen tried to encourage Mob, saying that he had saved many people with his powers. He also assured Mob that everything would be okay. Meanwhile, at Salt Middle School, Onigawara introduced the Shadow Leader system to his gang members. They planned to make the person who defeated Taruki their Shadow Leader. However, they still didn't know who that person was. Elsewhere, Misato started interrogating and suspecting Mob as the one responsible for the chaos at Black Vinegar Middle School, but Mob refused to say anything about it. At the same time, Onigawara asked Captain Musashi who had defeated Taruki. However, Musashi refused to answer because he and his club members disliked violence and wanted nothing to do with it anymore. While walking down the street, Onigawara happened to run into Mob. He apologized to Mob and admitted that he was the reason Mob got kidnapped by the Black Vinegar Middle School gang. However, they were unaware that Ritsu was secretly listening to their conversation. Shortly after, the school's student council, led by Kamuro, held their monthly meeting. Ritsu, being one of the smartest members, was asked for his opinion on what activities they should conduct this month. Ritsu suggested that they discipline the school's delinquents to create a peaceful and orderly environment. On his way home, Ritsu was suddenly stopped by a mysterious man named Mitsura Kenji. Kenji handed him an invitation to visit his research facility to enhance his psychic abilities. It turned out, Kenji mistakenly believed Ritsu was Mob. The next day, Ritsu went to the designated location. There, he saw many scientists conducting research at a place called the Awakening Lab. After that, Ritsu was taken to a room where several so-called psychic prodigies were gathered. But in reality, they were just a bunch of kids with mediocre abilities. For example, Hoshino Takeshi struggled just to bend a spoon. Kurosakiri could predict and guess card sequences, but his success rate was only 60%. Another kid, Asashigo, had to work hard just to ignite a small flame on his net. Lastly, there were the brothers Daichi and Kaito, who had telepathic abilities that allowed them to communicate with each other even when separated. Kenji then introduced Ritsu to all of them. It turned out that Kenji was a rich kid, but he had no special abilities. Despite this, he desperately wanted to become an Esper, so he went as far as building the research facility. However, after seeing their ridiculous antics, Ritsu lost interest in joining them. On the other hand, we get a glimpse into the life of Kamuro, the student council president. His mother always compared him to his older brother, who was highly accomplished. Even his brother believed that Kamuro became the student council president only to cover up his own shortcomings. Hearing this, Kamuro couldn't say anything. He simply locked himself in his room. The next morning at school, Kamuro called Ritsu to inform him of his plan. He intended to clean up their school, just as Ritsu had suggested during the previous student council meeting. Kamuro then stole a recorder belonging to a female student and placed it inside Onigawara's desk drawer. Ritsu, who witnessed this, immediately told Kamuro that he was going too far. He had never suggested using such underhanded tactics. Despite Ritsu's warning, Kamuro kept manipulating him, leaving Ritsu unable to do anything. Meanwhile, on the other side, Onigawara was training with Captain Musashi. Musashi had successfully convinced Onigawara to change for the better. At the same time, in class, the female students started panicking after discovering their recorders were missing. Just as planned, Kamuro then ordered Ritsu to open Onigawara's desk drawer in front of the entire class. At that moment, Onigawara walked into the room, and everyone's eyes turned to him. When Ritsu opened the drawer, they found pieces of broken recorders belonging to multiple students. Of course, Onigawara had no idea what was happening. Kamuro immediately accused him, claiming that Onigawara had been licking the recorders. Shocked, Onigawara tried to defend himself, but then Ritsu opened Onigawara's bag and found even more broken recorders inside. The entire class, especially the girls, immediately labeled Onigawara a pervert. Even the girl who had secretly liked Onigawara began to think the same as everyone else. Not long after, Ritsu returned to Kenji's research lab. There he sat in silence, realizing the terrible thing he had just done. Angry at himself, he threw the spoon he had been holding. Ritsu then decided to leave and told Kenji that he actually had no psychic powers. But Kenji didn't believe him, especially after noticing that the spoon Ritsu had just thrown was now bent. On his way home, Ritsu happened to run into Raigen, but as usual, Ritsu ignored him and walked away without speaking. When he arrived home, Ritsu was shocked to see a floating green spirit, none other than Dimple. Meanwhile, news about the shadow leader of Salt Middle School, the one who had defeated Teruki, had already spread across all the middle schools in town. They even gave Mob the title White Poison, without knowing who he really was. Because of this, several gang leaders from other schools became eager to challenge and defeat Mob. On the other hand, Dimple began explaining who he was to Ritsu. It turned out that Dimple had survived his battle with Teruki. However, his power had significantly weakened. Even after the explanation, Ritsu still didn't understand what kind of creature was in front of him. He immediately started attacking Dimple. With no other choice, Dimple then claimed that he was Mob's friend. He also revealed that Ritsu had just awakened his psychic abilities, which was why he could now see Dimple. At first, Ritsu refused to believe it, but his doubts vanished when he suddenly managed to bend multiple spoons with his newfound power. This realization made Ritsu incredibly excited. Seizing the opportunity, Dimple tried to recruit Ritsu, tempting him with the promise of surpassing Mob's strength. Ritsu was stunned. Then, Dimple attempted to possess Ritsu's body. His true intention was to take full control of Ritsu. However, Dimple was too weak to overpower him. His spiritual energy was far too depleted. But with Dimple inside him, Ritsu's power increased significantly. He could now move objects without touching them. Dimple explained that Ritsu's psychic powers had only awakened because of his emotions. A short while later, Ritsu and Kamuro resumed their plans at school. They confronted Yamazaki, one of the school's delinquents. Kamuro then accused Yamazaki of stealing the girls' gym uniforms. Ritsu backed up this claim, saying he had found them inside Yamazaki's bag. Hearing this, Yamazaki immediately denied it. However, Kamuro threatened him with a severe punishment, but he offered a way out. If Yamazaki confessed that Onigawara had ordered him to do it, his punishment would be reduced. Sometime later, Kamuro had successfully expelled many delinquents from school, though he had done so using deceitful methods. Because of this, Kamuro felt powerful, as if he were on top of the world as the student council president. However, Ritsu felt extremely guilty, as if a heavy burden weighed on him. Surprisingly, all of this only made Ritsu's psychic powers grow even stronger. A little while later, Ritsu returned to Kenji's research lab. Arrogantly, he showed off his powers to everyone there. On his way home, Ritsu was suddenly confronted by a group of delinquents from his school. Apparently, Kamuro had already told them that Ritsu had framed them to get them punished. Without saying much, Ritsu, together with Dimple, used his psychic abilities to take them down one by one. Coincidentally, Teruki happened to witness what had just happened. He then warned Ritsu not to use his powers recklessly on others, but Ritsu ignored him. Meanwhile, Dimple, who was panicking, warned Ritsu not to start a fight with Teruki. But once again, Ritsu didn't care and prepared to attack. However, Teruki thought Ritsu was simply trying to shake hands with him. Suddenly, Ritsu was overwhelmed by Taruki's immense power. Luckily, he managed to escape, thanks to Taruki's wig nearly falling off. Taking advantage of the moment, Ritsu ran away. At that moment, he realized how weak he still was. Determined, he vowed to become even stronger. Meanwhile, Mob was walking down the street when he was suddenly stopped by a woman. She was a salesperson from an antique shop. The woman offered Mob an antique vase, tempting him with a discounted price. Of course, Mob had no interest in buying it, especially since it was still ridiculously expensive. The woman then asked Mob to touch the vase first, but instead she deliberately pushed it. Fortunately, Mob was able to catch it using his psychic powers, yet the woman refused to give up. She intentionally shoved Mob again, making the vase shatter on the ground. Mob panicked. At the same time, the woman's boss arrived. He demanded that Mob contact someone to take responsibility for the damage. Shortly after, Reigen arrived at the scene. The shop owner then demanded that Reigen pay for the broken vase. Hearing this, Reigen laughed and said it was just a worthless, cheap vase. His words enraged the shop owner. He grabbed Reigen's shirt and threatened him. Using his usual con artist skills, Reigen turned the tables, demanding compensation for his torn clothes and even hospital fees. This only made the shop owner even angrier. Left with no choice, Reigen told a horror story. He claimed he had recently spoken to a man who was being haunted by a vengeful spirit. But unfortunately, that spirit had started haunting Reigen instead. Reigen then suggested that the spirit might have transferred itself to the shop owner. At first they laughed off his story, but suddenly they froze in fear. Objects in the shop began falling on their own. After the incident, Reigen thanked Mob for helping him with his telekinesis. But strangely, Mob said he hadn't done anything while in the store. Meanwhile, at school, Kamuro once again tried to convince Ritsu to continue their cleansing mission. On the other hand, Onigawara remained silent. He hadn't returned to class since the pervert scandal. Shortly after, Kamuro and Ritsu suddenly confronted him. Kamuro questioned why Onigawara was skipping class. Seeing this, Captain Musashi tried to defend Onigawara, but at the same time, someone arrived with urgent news. A strange person had entered their school. It was Kenzaki Yuto, the leader of the Peanut Middle School gang. He had come to find White Poison, the shadow leader of Salt Middle School. But it didn't take long. With Dimple's help, Ritsu easily defeated him. Later, while walking down the street, Kamuro was suddenly ambushed by a gang from another middle school. They mistakenly believed Kamuro was White Poison, the one who had defeated Kenzaki. As a result, Kamuro was brutally beaten. The next day, Kamuro begged Ritsu to stop what they were doing, but Ritsu didn't care. He thought Kamuro deserved it. Again, another group of middle school gang leaders showed up and beat Kamuro. Because of this, Kamuro stopped coming to school altogether, locking himself in his room, which was now a complete mess. Meanwhile, Ritsu had only grown more ruthless. He openly declared himself as White Poison, vowing to cleanse all middle school gangs in town. Not long after, 4 gangs from 4 different schools suddenly surrounded Ritsu. Meanwhile, Taruki watched from afar. He turned away, intending to inform Mob that someone was impersonating him. Not far from the scene, a mysterious man was also observing the situation. Moments later, the 4 gangs charged at Ritsu. But with Dimple's help, Ritsu used his psychic abilities to paralyze them. Then, he attacked them one by one until none of them could stand. But suddenly, Mob arrived at the scene. He looked at Ritsu and asked, "What have you done?" All right, friends, that concludes the storyline for Mob Psycho 100 Part 3. We'll discuss the next part in the following video. If you don't want to miss the next story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. All right, that's all for now. I'll see you in the next video.